Welcome to part two of my annotating documents for paper one to get ready for your global examinations. In the first part, we went over the first few steps, including finding the main conclusion, going over Raven, structure, and then beginning to assess based on that structure. I want to move on now to weaknesses. Obviously, it depends on the passage, but in this passage, one of the weaknesses comes in the counter and the refutation to the counter. It's always good if the author brings up the other side and then brings up either a balance, admitting that the other side has a point, that can be a strength, or refuting the other side by showing some kind of false logic or assumption on the part of the counter. However, if the author either dismisses the other side or doesn't strongly refute the other side, this could be a weakness. And we see this happening here with this article. So in the beginning, they bring up the other side. Universally, masculinity is linked to gun ownership. And then in the second paragraph, in broader terms, gun culture is part of our tradition. But they don't really then prove how this is wrong or what the government can do to curb this and thus curb the deaths that occur because of shooting guns at weddings, for example. In addition, masculinity is linked to gun ownership, and psychologists say that this desire to own guns comes from man's lack of confidence is a gross generalization. It could have been a logical premise, but by talking about masculinity in general, it seems more like a huge generalization that is not actually founded on any true principles. Moreover, psychologist is vague, and by not specifying a specific psychologist or a study conducted by a psychological journal, this is therefore a huge weakness. The other thing you want to consider of any document is the scope they take. And by scope, I mean, are they looking at this politically, economically, culturally, socially? And is that a strength or a weakness to the document? In this case, they're looking at it culturally. The fact that using guns at weddings and other holidays is so prominent in India. In this case, I feel it's a weakness though, because most of the article is about examples of deaths or how easy it is to get a gun or statistics on uh, legal guns versus illegal guns when it comes to death. That establishes the problem. That does not help to explain how the government can tackle this culturally. So the scope here is not well connected to the evidence used to support the main conclusion. As far as its global scope, in this case, it really only focuses on India. And even though in the last paragraph it mentions India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, the author does not actually bring up those two other countries. So that can be seen as a weakness. I do want to clarify, it's okay for an article to just focus on one country. If it wants to look at something on a micro level and look at really close details about one particular country or region, that's okay. But the fact that they brought up these other countries at the end when they weren't brought up before is where this becomes weak. And the last thing we already discussed, whether it's one-sided or balanced. A one-sided argument is perfectly acceptable. So is a balanced argument. But as I said in the beginning, what you want to look out for is to see if they did a good job, if it is one-sided, with refuting the other side. And in the case of this one, they did not. So when you look at the overall picture, the inductive structure was well done, but there's some glaring weaknesses that you could easily argue overall this document is not as strong as it could be. So these are the basic steps you want to follow when you're annotating and critiquing a document. You would follow the same thing for document 2 to then be ready to answer paper 1 question 2 and then paper 1 question 3. Thank you for tuning in.